asterisk. For years, she watched. Every night, the man next door would disappear into the darkness, dragging sacks into his yard. He thought no one was paying attention. But Sage the golden husky never looked away. She saw the digging. She saw the burying. She saw the chilling smile he gave her afterward. But she wasn't watching out of fear. Now, the police have arrived. The yard is torn open. The secrets are finally exposed. But as the world recoils in horror, Sage does something no one expects. She breaks free. She races toward the scene, not to run from the horror, but to meet it. Because she wasn't just watching, she was waiting. A psychological thriller that will leave you questioning what truly lurks behind the eyes of those who stare the longest. Some dogs guard, others remember. Asterisk. Cool and fresh, the air sifts through the morning as Sage, the golden-coated husky mix, perches on her porch, staring intensely into the neighbor's yard. It is a cold winter morning, and her owner, half asleep, watches her with mild amusement. He has always found her obsession with that yard strange, but after enduring her persistent scratching and the clacking of her nails on the door, he could care less. Unbeknownst to him, Sage's unwavering gaze holds a purpose. The neighbor's yard harbors a dark, sinister secret. It began when she was just a pup, enjoying the crisp night air as huskies and husky mixes do. That was when she first saw him, the man from next door. She had been startled when he emerged under the cover of darkness, dragging a sack into his vast, tree-filled yard, nearly the size of a football field. She watched, ears pricked and nose twitching, as he dug a hole, tossed the sack inside, covered it with dirt, and walked away as if nothing had happened. But Sage knew something had happened, and she never forgot. Over the years, she watched him repeat the ritual, sack after sack, buried beneath the earth. Sometimes, after finishing his work, he would glance at her and smile. Other times, he would toss her a treat, the doggy kind, before disappearing back into his home. Yet, no matter how many treats he offered, Sage remained fixated, her piercing gaze never wavering. Now, many years later, Sage is older, her golden fur dusted with gray, but she still watches with the same intensity. Her owner still thinks she is odd, but she doesn't care. She has a duty. Then, one day, everything changes. The neighbor's yard is no longer quiet. It is swarmed with police officers and crime scene investigators, their shovels tearing into the earth. Reporters speak into cameras, their voices urgent. Sage watches in alarm as the yard she has guarded with her eyes for so long, is disturbed. And she does not like it. She barks furiously, her hackles raised, her body tense. She watches as the men unearth sack after sack, laying them out on the ground like trophies of something unspeakable. Her frustration builds. She whines, she paces, she growls, until finally she can take it no longer. With a burst of energy, Sage leaps over the fence, racing toward the scene. Chaos erupts as she darts past officers and investigators, her nose leading her straight to the nearest sack. She sniffs frantically, her tail wagging in anticipation. She has waited so long for this moment. She had not stared out of curiosity. She had not stared in hopes of more treats. She had stared because she wanted to meet the ones in the sacks. And now, as a decomposed hand slips from the bag she is sniffing, Sage finally meets one at last. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night where you just wanted to curl up with a good book and a cup of tea. But alas, there was no book to be found, and the only tea was cold and bitter. So instead, the restless soul decided to take a walk. The wind howled and the rain pelted down, but the figure trudged onward, undeterred. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the distance. The figure quickened its pace, drawn in by the light. As it got closer, the figure could see that the light was coming from a lamp in a window of a large, imposing house. The figure approached the house and knocked on the door. There was no answer. It knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. Just as the figure was about to give up and turn away, the door finally opened. A small, mousy-looking woman peered out from the crack in the door. "Yes?" she asked in a timid voice. Sorry to bother you," the figure began. "I was just out for a walk and I noticed your light. I thought maybe I could come in out of the rain for a bit." The woman hesitated for a moment, but then she seemed to make up her mind. "Very well," she said, opening the door wider to let the figure in. The figure stepped into the house and was immediately enveloped in warmth. The small woman led the way to a cozy sitting room where a fire was crackling in the fireplace. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking armchair. The figure sank into the chair with a sigh of relief. It was then that the figure noticed the small woman was wearing a rather odd-looking outfit. She had on a long, flowing dress that seemed to be made from some kind of shimmery material, and around her neck was a strange-looking necklace with a large, glowing stone in the center. "What a fascinating necklace," the figure said, before it could stop itself. The woman's hand flew to the necklace self-consciously. "Oh, this old thing? It's just a little trinket I picked up on my travels. It looks like it could be valuable," the figure said. The woman's eyes lit up. "You think so? I've always wondered about that. It is rather beautiful, isn't it?" "Yes, it is," the figure said. "Where did you say you got it?" "Oh, I didn't," the woman said. "But I can tell you, if you promise not to tell anyone." The figure leaned in closer. "I promise. I got it from a dragon," the woman said in a conspiratorial whisper. The figure's eyes nearly popped out of its head. "A dragon? You're joking!" The woman shook her head. "I'm not joking. I was on a quest to slay the dragon, and when I finally defeated it, I took its treasure as my prize." The figure was speechless. It was hard to believe that this small, unassuming woman had actually slain a dragon. But then, the necklace was proof that she was telling the truth. "That's an incredible story," the figure said finally. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "It's Martha," the woman said. "Martha, it's been a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure I'll be telling this story for years to come." And with that, the figure bid Martha goodbye and stepped back out into the stormy night. But now, the figure didn't mind the weather. After all, it had just met a real-life dragon slayer. He was a patient, a prisoner, a man trapped in a cycle of waiting for break week to end, waiting for lockdown to lift, waiting for something to happen. Then, one day, it did. A book on Kung Fu arrived. A single punch shattered a chair. A single mistake shattered a life. The patient became the predator. The walls of the hospital became a battlefield, and the world became his hunting ground. With every soul he consumed, he became something other, something unstoppable, something monstrous. But even monsters have enemies. And when the hunter becomes the hunted, only one question remains. Can you kill something that refuses to die? Or worse, what if you can't even recognize what it's become? It's break week, and I wait all day for the day to be over so I can watch the movie on the Patient Education Network. I will probably hate it. It seems like all day, every day, I am waiting for nothing to happen. There always seems to be an event in the hospital I want to go to. It lasts for about an hour out of the whole day, and even though I end up hating it, I always end up waiting all day to attend it. In jail, you are always wanting the time to go by faster, but even if it does, it's still that much time missing from your life. But why the enforced idleness? If I was working, at least it'd have something to do with my time. This reminds me of when I was a kid, how I used to wait for my mom to take me to homeschool classes. Just like now, I wasn't allowed to leave my home, even though the groups were in walking distance. The classes here are only a few feet away, but I am not allowed to leave on my own because I have no level. Just as when I was a kid and I couldn't handle school, now I am an adult who can't handle work. Of course, I will never be given a chance to find out. As a child, I was much too gifted to go to school. Now as an adult, I am far too flawed to go to work. Of course, those assertions will never be tested again. Soon I will have to wait for break week to be over, and the goddamn weekend to be over. And now, on top of all that, there is this lockdown. I have to wait out before I can even go to the yard. I read that if an event, good or bad, is half as important, then it is 10 times as likely. If I just wait long enough, something interesting will happen. It's a statistical inevitability. Finally, one morning, I got a book on Kung Fu in the mail. I read the whole thing several times, but I couldn't seem to concentrate on it. The descriptions of moves in the book seemed too ridiculous to be plausible. One move that seemed doable was a 1-inch punch, like in the Kill Bill movie. I practiced for a month until I could break the chairs in the quiet room. Then one day, another patient was acting particularly retarded and gay. I followed him to the bathroom and flicked the light off and punched him in the chest when he was sitting on the toilet. I heard a woof of air go out of him and the crack of his ribs. I knew he was dead as I went to my room. They locked down the entire hospital. They also searched us for God knows what. I kept quiet and practiced my moves. Soon I could do a 5-fingertip transfer of ki, or so I thought. I was anxious to test my new moves out, for some of them could only be done to another person. If I continued to perform in secret, I could perfect many a technique, but I could never be sure it would work until I rushed it to experimentation. I had made something bizarre happen, but it was bad. Now I would bring about something even more unusual, and I would not wait. I followed a staff to the laundry room and asked him for a towel. As he reached down to get it, I put my hand over his face and drew the key right out of his body. With his life came his likeness. Wearing his clothes, I began to look just like him. I walked out the door without saying anything more. I walked out the sally port, and I used the man's memories to tell me where his car was. As I got on the freeway, I thought on how my life had changed into something like a video game. I would always have to be fighting. Now I could never relax. I drove to the city. I was searching for a hooker, but I never seem to find one when I am looking for her. I parked the man's car someplace random and left it there. After being on foot so long, I was not able to search and drive at the same time. I figured they may be searching for his car as well. First, I checked in at a hotel so I would have a place to go. I didn't have to, but I found a guy already staying in the hotel and drained him of his soul and his identity. He already had a wife who was staying at the hotel, so a prostitute was unnecessary. He would have to ditch this wife at some point. It was impossible to maintain this charade forever, even though with the man's soul came some of his personality, making it easier to pose as him. He was looking forward to screwing two chicks at the same time, and this woman, open-minded as she may be, would eventually have to go. Variety being the spice of life and all that. And of course there was no point in going through the heartbreak of dumping her when killing the broad was such a simple process. He proceeded, as he had done so many times already, to absorb her soul. Afterward he realized that this was his first female victim, and the feminineness of her personality washed over him, and he began to desire the things a woman might have. He had already begun to think of himself in the third person. Now she gave herself a feminine pronoun. She wanted to fuck as a woman. Not just other women, but every man and everything else besides. She realized that a man posing as a woman was probably sluttier than an authentic woman. She walked to the nearest lesbian bar, which was not as common as a gay bar, but still not altogether impossible to find. She saw a likely young lady alone and joined her wordlessly on the floor. This girl was pretty, she thought. Not some butch bulldyke, but a true lipstick lesbian. One thing led to another, and they were soon munching each other's rugs or Brillo pads, as it were. The creature was full of energy, and the young lady fell asleep with its mouth still on her lips. She gently lay her down and covered her lovingly with a blanket. She stood in the dark and regarded her sleeping form. She thought, "What a gentle being rests here. I think I'll spare her life." And in an act of unusual mercy for this thing, she did not kill the innocent girl. But her love did not include faithfulness to the little homosexual, and she was off in search of her next conquest. She returned to the lesbian bar this time, planning to put her allure to the test by picking up a straight man at a lesbian bar. She did not realize how easy that would be, since there were always a few straight men there hoping for a girl to do just that. The man she found may have been hoping for two girls to approach him, but he took what he could get. This late at night, he was lucky not to go home empty-handed. When he suggested his place, she thought of what a disaster she had left all those hotel rooms, and she quickly agreed. His place was as nice as the bar, but she wasn't there for the scenery. They did it all to the point of being thoroughly disgusted with themselves. It culminated with her forcing him to eat his own semen out of her so she would not get pregnant. She did not even know if that would work, but she could not resist that act of violent humiliation performed on a stranger. After he was finished, she grabbed his hair with her left hand and tilted his head back and placed her right middle finger between his eyes, index and ring fingers on his eyes, and thumb and pinky in the corners of his mouth. It burned, and he tried to scream, knowing he would be blind at the very least. She said, "Do you feel that? That's the heat escaping your body." The Asian dude answered the phone right away. Preston was somewhat surprised that he picked it up himself. "What do you need?" he said in English. "I need someone killed for me, very tough, a soul drinker." "1 million, said the Oriental. "Okay." On the plane ride there, the man did not eat or drink anything. In case he would die, he did not want to shit his pants. Meanwhile, the soul drinker was also on a fast, having temporarily satiated himself with victims. He was kicking back in a hammock, suspended between two pine trees which had been forced to lean together. Though he was not killing, he was not difficult to find. The Asian had a nose like a compass for his tainted aura. He came upon the trees and set fire to both of them. Being summer, this was managed with just a lighter. The demon, with his heightened senses, immediately noticed the flame. He spotted the Asian and dove for the ground. He turned it into a jump, missing the Asian. The acrobatic feat alone confirmed the demon's identity. So the Oriental took a running start and launched a vicious kick which ended up flying over the demon's head. The demon turned and caught the other man while he was still in the air. They went to the ground, the Oriental swinging wildly in the crushing grip of the monster. The fight lasted a good 15 minutes, with the beast mindlessly squeezing and strangling, wishing he had studied more kung fu when he had the chance. The Asian man finally kneed the creature in the testicles and shrugged off his shirt to wriggle out of his grip. Then they were both standing, facing on another. The demon was not fatigued at all. The Oriental allowed this, maybe because he was tired. His superior striking skills not very useful in the wrestling match. The demon, faster than thought, made a jab toward the ribs of his competitor and plucked out his still beating heart and took a bite out of it just like in a movie. It was simply for show to whom. Since this demon was no longer able to take nourishment this way, he threw the body and the heart in a ditch, licked up the blood to remove evidence, put out the fire and took down the hammock. Then he ran away. The next contestant, called Preston himself, wanting the challenge, the Soul Drinker video game style. He claimed that he was the Lord of Air, able direct gusts of wind, essentially moving them with his mind. You understand, it's the chi, he said, which is another word for air. When you exhale, you know the prana as it leaves your body and stays with you wherever it goes. Preston told the being where his creature could be found, and the Windmaster happened upon him as he was drinking blood from a woman's neck like a vampire. The alley was confined, but windy, which was well suited to the Wind King's taste. He wasted no time talking to the creature. There was no point bandying words with this cunning but mindless animal. As the thing looked up at him, he inhaled and let loose a powerful blast of wind at the creature. The Soul Drinker was driven back by the repeated onslaughts of air that were buffeting him. The Wind King did not let up even to take a breath, for he had circular breathing like a trumpet player. The only problem was, the air was not doing any actual damage to the Soul Drinker, who began winding from side to side, beating attack ever closer to the Wind King. The Wind Master saw him coming, but was essentially a one-trick pony, unable to defend himself from the inevitable. And then it happened. The creature's hands were on his face, and it was all over. The Soul Drinker felt a rush of energy at the defeat of such a powerful being. As a newly established creature of darkness, Steve decided to acquire some taste, and to him this meant objects of taste. Steve visited museums, galleries, and private collections, stealing objects of fine art. Of course, he didn't understand the merit of the paintings and such he was handling. Some were stolen more for their cash or pornographic value than aesthetic. The sheer volume, however, was unspeakable. He soon had more than you can fit on the walls, and he stacked them in piles on the floor. He began to sell the pieces in online auctions because he found that he could make more money than he could reasonably steal it. He soon had more than enough to buy a $2.1 million mansion in a secluded area on top of a hill. Steve was now able to shift through his various forms at will, so he took on that of a tall man whom he had snuffed in some time past. He purchased the house and was left to straighten it up himself, which was not easy since he was a killer, not a painter or a maid. Somewhere in the stores of his victims' memories, he found what he needed to get it done quickly. He took a trip around the grounds. Stephen awoke from a disturbing dream in which he had grown a hole in the palm of his hand, with a mouth like that of a lamprey eel. In the dream, he was masturbating, and he used the hole in his hand as the orifice. When he removed his hand, he saw that his dick was gone, devoured with only a few scraps of flesh remaining. He screamed and woke up, looking at his hand to see the mouth was still there. His dick was erect and present. This was not enough to allay his fears, and he ran screaming from his bachelor pad in the loft of a vacant apartment. Stephen jumped from building to building like Spider-Man. While he was gone, a young lady crept into his abode and stole his book on martial arts. She met Preston on the sidewalk and gave him the book. Preston said, "This will make great bait for that freak." She said, "Let's get out of here before he gets back." Back in his office, late at night, Preston read part of the book and posted its contents at an online auction. Preston was stunned at some of the offers he encountered, but he decided to save to book evidence and do the right thing. "I only pray the bastard doesn't show up right now, before I am ready." He looked out the windows expecting him, but there was no sign. After sufficiently gorging himself, the demon was content but bored. He wondered what to do with his power and decided that the thing to do was to play God. He would create a living thing in his one image. But a demon like himself would be undue competition for him. So, having little imagination, he decided he would create a breeding pair of the two finest bats in the known world. Upon deciding to outdo the Lord, he began to consult texts in naturalism, a taxonomy of the Lord's creations. By imitating, he sought to surpass, and surpass he did, albeit after much trial and error. From two ends of his garden, he released the Adam and Eve of bats. The male flew first ponderously and confidently. The female danced like a butterfly. She let out a plaintive cry, a mating call audible even to the demon's sensitive ears. Sadly, it was audible to a good many common bats, fruit bats, gnat bats, and such. All males, some desirous and some envious of her protection. They all tried to mount he at once, and a good many died, including her. The demon looked on powerless to intervene. The male, for his part, chose discretion and lived out his days as a familiar in service to the demon. Steve sent his bat out the window of an apartment he had rented to survey the town. His spirit was linked to the bat, which was his familiar but not quite his spirit guide. Steve at last could enjoy the gift of flight, if only by proxy. He poured his soul into the bat, much as so many souls had been poured into him, and by doing so, he felt a measure of release. He found that by escaping his body temporarily, he could leave for a time the folks who cohabitated with him. He flew over a young lady basking naked in the moonlight and gazed on her hardened nipples like large goosebumps on her shivering skin. Steve willed the bat to alight on her lounge chair and then take a nibble from her big toe. She let out a startled yelp and ran for cover. The bat of its own accord took to the air and cruised along until, out of nowhere, a teen boy who was hunting from his window at night took him from the air with a BB pellet. Steve not only felt the shot, but the fall as well. The death of the bat felt like a pulled tooth because he had invested so much of himself. He lay in his bed for days with a splitting headache. Finally, his need drove him to hunt again. At this time, the demon whom Stephen had become ran afoul of a woman of more than usual prowess. She was a Jezebel, an Ishtar, a very whore of Babylon in the flesh. She met Stephen at a bar. He still frequented bars often, they being open at most hours, and him not being required to do anything there but fork over some cash at a continuous pace. This was a classy dive, for that was how Steve saw himself as elite by virtue of the money he had acquired but did not earn. She sat down on a stool next to him and swiped the coaster from under his drink without spilling it, and set it down with hers on top of it. If he was charmed by her juvenile magic trick, he did not show it. In fact, he didn't show a sign of anything at all. You might have thought he was passed out, but Ishtar knew better. She planted a smacking kiss right on his ear, thinking to startle or annoy him. Of course, Steve was fully cognizant of what she was doing and took it all in stride. "Will you come to my bedroom?" he asked, strangely, since they were not in his house. Ishtar never said no to a man, and wouldn't start with this one, so she followed him home. He did not disappoint her. Only after fucking her, he pulled her hair back and lowered her over his knee with her face up. She, having some inkling of what was going on, said, "How do you make people love you?" Perhaps she said it just to confuse him. Without another word, he placed his other hand over her face and drew out her soul through a hole in his palm made for that purpose. This time, Preston had a plan. He found a 19-year-old girl, high on heroin. She had cuts all over her arms. She was a gothic chick. She no longer was supported by her parents, so she had turned to selling her body to maintain her lifestyle. She radiated depression, and when Preston found her, she was suffering both hepatitis and AIDS. She was perfect for what Preston had in mind. She was lured into Stephen's territory with money, of course, and the promise of more forthcoming. Watching her, Preston hoped to himself that the beast would show up because he couldn't afford to pay her anymore. Preston was not disappointed. Steve swooped down from atop the roof. Somewhere he had learned to fly. The girl let out a half-hearted scream. Quickly, her very life was flowing out her nose and mouth. Steve then tried to jump back to the rooftop. He couldn't make it, crashing to the ground, dizzy and lightheaded. Preston stifled a laugh. The fool! Her bad vibes are already getting to him. Steve crawled upstairs to his room. Preston followed a ways behind to deliver the coup. Preston crept up the stairs after Stephen. Altered by the girl he had consumed, old wounds began to open up on Stephen. Preston followed the trail of blood droplets. Steve pulled a key as he reached the hallway on the 3rd floor. When he opened his door, Preston rushed him before he could shut it behind him. Stephen turned and made a half-assed attempt to claw at the detective's face, which Preston batted aside. Stephen fell to the floor and crawled to his room. Preston pistol whipped him until he pointed to the location of the book. When Preston returned from the acquisition of the book, he found that Stephen had turned on his stomach on his bed, so he fired a full clip into his neck, severing his head from his body. Preston was sure of his deed, for he could see the hungry ghosts in the room, all the souls escaping the demon's body. The room was cluttered with newspapers. It could be easily